And sure, parties are inevitable. We're going to have people who prefer the Democratic Party and people who prefer the Republican Party. But right now, that's not our issue in the States. It's not like people are confused about the parties. It's people are confused about the system. And so it's really hard to get involved anymore because they don't quite know how it happens in the back end.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Together, we can make a better future. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. In this episode, I'm going to chat with someone who understands the value of a good civics education. This comes at a time when observers are rating the U.S. as a flawed democracy, and a current presidential nominee has been indicted for insurrection. Gerrymandering of districts is rampant, voter suppression bills are common, and a significant minority of voters seems to feel this is just fine. If you like what you're hearing, please press like on your podcast app, share it with your friends, come chat with me on my Facebook group, The Rational View. And also look me up on YouTube. I do have videos of my podcasts there. Dr. Lindsey Cormack is an associate professor of political science and director of the Diplomacy Lab at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. She earned her PhD in government from New York University and is raising a daughter on the Upper East Side. She currently serves as the Secretary for Community Board 8 in Manhattan. She created and maintains the digital database of all official Congress-to-constituent e-newsletters in the DCInbox Project. Her research has been widely published. She's the author of the new book, How to Raise a Citizen and Why It's Up to You to Do It. Dr. Cormack, welcome to The Rational View.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
So could you give us all a little bit of insight into your work? It's very interesting in your bio. You're director of the Diplomacy Lab and DCInbox. What are these? Could you tell us a little bit about these projects? They sound very interesting.
Sure thing. The first thing that I did when I was getting my PhD in politics was to create this database that I call DCInbox. And what it is every member of Congress gets a budget where they get to communicate with their constituents free of charge. It's a taxpayer perk that they get by being in office. And when I originally got interested in this, I thought, surely there's got to be a database of this. Surely we should be able to see what they're writing. We paid for it. And the answer was there was, but it was a hard copy printed out at the Library of Congress. And they were so nice. They were like, you could scan them all in if you wanted. And I was like, well, that doesn't quite make sense. They're digitally created to be digitally disseminated. The database should be digital as well. So I started that in 2009. It goes through today. It's updated in real time, and it's every official e-newsletter that they send out from the House and the Senate. And it is my true first love in politics because I get to see so many ways that our politics happens. A lot of us only get to see whatever sort of like algorithmic media diet we're on. So you might see left stuff, you might see right stuff, but I'm going like straight to the sources, and it's really sort of shaped the way I view and understand our federal politics.
Oh, wow, that's really cool. So is this available to anyone? Anyone can go look at DCInbox, or is it
Absolutely.
private?
Yeah, it's totally free. It's online. It's DCInbox.com, pretty user-friendly and pretty basic to figure out what you want and how you can find it.
What a cool resource. That's awesome. And what's the Diplomacy Lab?
The Diplomacy Lab is an interesting partnership between a set of universities and the Department of State at the federal level. Under the Obama administration, they set up this thing where they'll give us about 190 projects every semester, and they'll pitch it to all the universities, and they'll say, do you have anyone who would like to run a class that talks about maybe we're trying to do like peacekeeping in Burundi, or maybe we're trying to have some like updated process by which people get passports. Can you have a class that's going to have like people who can think about this and then present their ideas to us? And it goes, there's some years where we do pick a project and some years where we don't, depending on the capacity of our teachers, depending on the desires of our students. But it's us and about 50 other schools where the State Department gives out these little assignments. We get to take them on. And if you do really well, you go to DC technology and present and meet with the people who are like in charge of that little sphere. And so it's a really nice, like hands-on, real-world way for students to kind of see what the government does. And it also gives them sort of like free research from people who are trying their best, but, taking a crack at it for the first time as undergraduates.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. So you've recently published a new book, and in it, you say that we are failing our young people by not teaching and talking about politics and government. And you say that the United States has a civic deficit, and there's studies that will show this. Can you talk about that, some of the factors perhaps that are leading to this deficit and the evidence that shows there's this deficit?
Sure. So there's a lot of factors as to why we got to where we are right now, but I'll give you sort of like the top line. One is government's kind of tricky. It's kind of intricate. We have multiple layers. There's different things that go on. There's historical considerations. There's future considerations. So it's not something where we can just sort of like teach our kids this in one semester and expect them to know that all. It's kind of tricky. Thing two is a lot of us have a history of not talking about politics, whether it's in our like family cultures or our wider community cultures. It gets to like sit as a taboo, sometimes with things like sex or drugs or money or religion. And so we just don't really know how to do it because a lot of us aren't really practiced in it. The third thing is when we do talk about it, we usually have a negative look at it. And it's not surprising if our kids hear us say all the time, oh, everyone in it is an egomaniac, or they're all cheaters or liars. Of course, they're not going to want to go figure out more. Who wants to go into that? And then the last argument that I really get into in depth in the book is about how schools from about the 1940s onwards have had some really big constraints that make it so hard to deliver the necessary information in the course of a child's life that most of our kids get to 18 and they don't know the basics because we haven't had any institutional structures that can teach them it in the right way. We do too little, too late. And it's just not working. We see it in AP US government scores. We see it in nation's report card scores. We see it in voter registration for young people, voter turnout for young people. So all of our indicators sort of show us we have a problem. And this book was an effort to say, let's spotlight it. Let's figure out how we got there and start to think about other ways that we can get out of this problem.
Yeah, I can understand people not wanting to talk about politics so much. It's become so polarized, and you hear anecdotes about families being torn apart, and how, Uncle Jack can't sit at the Thanksgiving dinner table with the family anymore because, it really has become a polarized issue. So understanding how we can talk about this is very important. And you're basically saying that kids are not being taught this in the school system either. What research have you done through this on the school system? Has it changed over the years? Like, was it better before and it's degraded because of some effect, or why is it now so bad?
Yeah, so these are great questions. I set out to do this project with 6 research assistants, and we sort of attacked it in a few ways. One was we went and gathered what are the statutory requirements in every state for how you're going to teach civics. And it's different in every state because we don't have, a nationalized education system. We have state-based education systems. And what we found is that on average, you're going to get like a 7th or 8th grade class that's called like US history or world history or some sort of social studies. And then in your second semester of your senior year of high school, there'll be a class called government. And that's sort of like the modal delivery, which is too little, too late by the time you're in 12th grade. And it's unlike anything else where you like scaffold from K through 12 and you like build little concepts as you go. And so that's not true in every state, but that's sort of like the modal delivery. We also looked at test scores. So we looked at like AP US test scores versus all the other AP scores that we have. And it's usually in the bottom 5 of all. There's like 30 to 40 tests, depending on the year. Sometimes some get added, some get sunset, but it's always at the very bottom, which is curious to us because, things like calculus will be at the top. Things like Mandarin will be at the top. And sure, some people are going to go on to use those every day, but every single person that sits for that exam is going to go on to live as a U.S. citizen for the most part in the United States, having to understand the apparatus. We also looked at the nation's report card, and we conducted interviews with teachers in nearly every state, not every state, but nearly every state to talk about this. Additionally, we looked at what curricular times have changed. And really, there's a lot of pressures as to why we don't teach it that much anymore. One of the big things is that with the focus on standardized tests to get into college, both of the tests that we use, the ACT and the SAT, focus on reading, math, and nothing about civics, nothing about social studies. So when you have a curriculum that has a time pressure, what's going to get squeezed out is the stuff that no one's going to get assessed on at that very end. And so That and some other constraints that schools face have made it really hard to do this.
Sure. So it's not assessed as part of your grades, but the impacts of this must show up elsewhere. The lack of a civics education, obviously, our civilization, our Western democracies are kind of under attack right now. And without this knowledge, there are problems. What do you see as some of the consequences of this lack of political knowledge?
Well, there's a bunch of them, but I think some of the big ones are it's really hard to play a game that you don't know the rules to. It also doesn't feel that good. And so when we have people who can't quite understand where their power lies or what levers to pull on to get things done, they kind of want to opt out. And we see that for young people. We see that from like 18 to about 30. They participate less. And it's not because they don't care about politics. They do. It's that there's so many hurdles to getting involved where like they maybe don't know what their registration deadline is. They oftentimes haven't been taught the difference between a primary election and a general election. So they don't really know how those sorts of things work. And so instead of saying, I guess I'll figure out this thing that everyone tells me is bad and negative anyhow, they sort of don't for a while. It's also hard in the sense that, we have so many different voter registration requirements depending on where you live that you can't just say, here's how it works everywhere. It's different everywhere. Some states you can do it online. Some states you can't. Some states you have to be 30 days out. Some states you can register the day you're ready to vote. And so there's just a lot of things that make it hard. And that's one of the downsides. Another thing is we are so much more susceptible to being outraged or to believing false information if we don't understand the basics. And that's just true in sort of any field of life. If you don't have a rooted understanding, you'll fall for things, or you'll be confused by things, or you'll be angered by things. And when we have an en masse problem of no one really knows what's happening here, it's not surprising that our media can whip us up into like frenzies because we just don't have the basis to make an assessment.
That's true. So you mentioned that young people don't know how to navigate the system or how to get registered to vote. Does your book discuss this? Like, is this aimed for parents or their children or first time voters? Would they be able to get information on how to navigate an election from this book, or do you have advice you could give us, perhaps?
Sure. So here's how the book's set up. The first part is saying, here's the problem that we have. We lay out the data on how little we know. Here's how we got there. We go through the history of how schooling has changed and how we've had traditions of not talking about this, how we've had deprioritization of civics and enhancement of STEM focus, and so on. And then I go into like how we can change these things. And I give people frameworks and ideas for the sorts of conversations that they can have with their kids, whether or not you're their biological kids, if you're an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, you never really know whose sort of civic role model you might be. And then I also talk about why it's actually good for you to do this work, why it benefits children and why it benefits adults to do that. And then in the second half of the book, it's essentially a primer that says, okay, and I know a lot of us grew up in systems that deprioritize civics as well. I know a lot of us don't have a lot of practice in this. So here's some very basics to get you started and show you how to go find out more things as they come up and are relevant to your life. So it really is targeted towards people who know that they're going to be around kids at some point and who want to make a better politics. Because I don't really know anyone who thinks our politics feels or functions that good right now, but it's not going to get better unless we decide to change something.
Yeah, I've, been following U.S. politics. Obviously, I'm here in Canada. It does impact us. We're kind of a satellite economy, so it's very important to make sure that everything remains stable if we want to have a stable society. So, what basically I found out is that in the U.S. there's a tradition in a lot of families of just voting a party. You see this partisan family, like I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, and people aren't engaging with the issues. Say they're just voting. I've been told that a significant chunk of people are just partisan voters and aren't even looking at the issues. How do we make families change? How can we help families to change this model and challenge themselves in meaningful discussions of the issues?
Yeah, I think your understanding of that is correct. I think here's how I talk about it. If you were to raise an athlete, like you wanted your child to play soccer, the way that you would do it is you would teach them the rules of the game, you would run conditioning exercises, you would practice with them. If you wanted them to be a really good fan, you might tell them about the soccer club that you like the most, you might teach them the chants, they're going to know the colors, and that's about it. But in politics, we are all athletes, not spectators, whether we like it or not. And so we really need to be teaching them, here's the rules of this game, and let them pick the teams later. The parties change, the personalities change, and we have to trust our kids to be able to figure out what resonates with them on that plane later. But we can't let them miss out on understanding how the rules of the game work and how to actually involve themselves in it. And so by thinking about it, not as trying to raise a little partisan, but just trying to raise a little citizen, I think you can cut through some of that. And sure, parties are inevitable. We're going to have people who prefer the Democratic Party and people who prefer the Republican Party. But right now, that's not our issue in the States. It's not like people are confused about the parties. It's people are confused about the system. And so it's really hard to get involved anymore because they don't quite know how it happens in the back end.
Yeah. And your point is very valid too. And, sticking to one party, you see these partisans, making points about how the party was 100 years ago or something, under Lincoln, or, back when Democrats controlled the South and the Republicans were the North. And now, the roles of the party has basically inverted over time. So, scoring points against your opposition because they supported slavery 100 years ago just doesn't make sense anymore, right? This isn't it evolves. And that's a very good point, I think, to take away. So do you talk at all about the actual systems themselves in your book, or the history of the system?
So the focus that I have on partisanship is very much at the front, where I say, look, if you're trying to figure out which party you should pick, this is not the book for you, because it doesn't do that work. So most of it is through the lens of, let me tell you how these different processes work. What does the Constitution say on where our separation of powers lie? What things can presidents do? What can they not do? What about in our federalist system? What do localities get to take care of? What do states get to take care of? What does the federal government get to take care of? And the reason that I talk about these things in the second half is when we were interviewing teachers, we said, what is it that you wish people knew before they left, but you don't have enough time to teach them? Okay. And we got into those gaps and said, okay, if your child doesn't understand this, you probably don't either, because we were talking to teachers who've been teaching for 20, 30 years. And so we try to focus on what those gaps are and giving people just some very basic building blocks that they can use to understand things in the very basic way, and then go on and find more information when they need it.
And are there any movements afoot to implement some of this? Like, how do people, if people are recognize the need for change and they see this deficit in the current system, what's the best way to fix the system? Is there a way to fix the system?
So, our school systems are just political decisions. Our school boards are politically elected. The decisions that they make are just people making choices. That's all politics. If we wanted to change our schools to say, hey, we actually think we should teach more of this a little bit earlier so that they could kind of understand the vocabulary and get to concepts, that's something that can happen. And it's not to say there's not bright spots. There are bright spots in the United States. Like Idaho now has K through 12s where there's going to be civics. Colorado is a state that's really tried to increase how much it focuses on this as well. Even where I live in New York City, we have a civics for all curriculum where kind of at every year that you're in a public school, you're going to have some touch point with an elected official or with some sort of process. And so there are ways to do this. But the argument in the book is that we can't really rely on schools to get this done on their own. It's a really hard issue. It's a collective action problem. Unless you're changing your state legislature, you can't really get it done. So why not start that work in your home? It doesn't have to be bad. It's a really neat way for your kids to get to know you, and then you get to know them in the process. And having that open line of communication with someone you love on really hard, controversial political topics is a good thing for them to get practice at, and for us to get practice at as well.
Yeah. And it can also, when you want to introduce issues to the kids as well, it can be overwhelming to wade through all the different media outlets and opinions out there today. I know in the past there were actual government acts that required news to be balanced, and that went away apparently in the US. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've gone to this highly polarized media environment where we have Democrat media outlets and Republican media outlets. This is one of the reasons I provide this podcast is to help people understand how to use the tools of science and evidence to dig through all of this misinformation. What are ways parents can help their children navigate content that gives them access to reliable information?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And it's similar to something that I field where people say like, well, where should my kids go look for information? And I don't have a good answer for that because our media diets are just so cut up. We're like, I'm never going to see the same things you're going to see. You're not going to see the same things anyone else sees. Our kids see different things than we see. And so I don't know that the goal should be, how can I get them to the right information? I think the goal should be, how can I make sure they understand enough so that they can discern whether or not something seems true or not true? And something that I talk about is doing sort of like check-ins with what your kids are looking at. So I have a 12-year-old. And she doesn't have social media, but she does have access to the internet. So, YouTube has shorts, Pinterest has shorts, like she sees these sorts of things. And every once in a while I say, can you show me something that you've been watching recently? And a lot of the times I don't care about it. It'll be like skincare routines or preppy ways to organize your desk or whatever. But as she gets older, I know she's going to get exposed to things that I might care a little bit more to see. And so it's not, snooping. It's not monitoring everything they watch. Just say like, hey, can you show me what you're seeing? Because I'm not going to see that stuff. And I learned something about her media diet. And if she asks me, I'm willing to do it too. And she can learn that I get like anti-aging stuff and knitting stuff. And yeah, and we just sort of appreciate that we're all getting different content. And instead of trying to figure out what's the best or optimal one, I think it's just to know that our tables are being set differently. We're getting different inputs.
Yeah, that's definitely something that people should realize. And the algorithms on social media are set up to give you things that make you happy, that align with your current thinking, that, you press like on that, they know that they're going to give you more of that stuff. And it's going to lead you down a rabbit hole and into a silo. And you really have to make an effort to step out of that silo to see the other side, and to allow the other people to exist as not just morons and dehumanize the other side. You need to really make an effort to step out. And your DC inbox has me intrigued. I want to go look into this now because I think that would be a great resource. Is this something that kids would be interested in, to go look through all of these things and get kind of a wider field of view on U.S. politics?
So it's something that I know high school teachers do sometimes have their kids use. If they say like, what's a topic that you're concerned about? You can go type it in the search bar, go see what Democrats are saying on it, go see what Republicans are saying on it, see how it's changed over time. So I know it gets used in schools. But to your first point, it's so hard to get out of whatever your algorithm wants to show you. I'm teaching an intro U.S. politics class right now, and it's a project that we're doing as a class, is we've made 2 Finstas, fake Instagram accounts, where I ask the students, I want you to give me a word or someone to follow for a liberal or a Democrat, and a word or someone to follow for a Republican or a conservative. And we have 2 different accounts. And then we spend 8 minutes at the end of each class looking at 4 minutes of what the Republican feed gives us and 4 minutes what the Democratic feed gets us. Because I know that in your regular life, where it's your phone and your algorithm, it's really hard to break out of it. But if we can kind of do this little exercise, we can kind of see what other people are saying. And I think that's important. And I know my students are finding it kind of eye-opening.
Yeah. Okay. That does sound really cool. So you also, I think, are interested in not just, federal issues, but also local and municipal issues. What are ways parents can encourage kids to learn about and participate even in local government?
Yeah, that's one of the easiest things to get involved in because local government turns on so many fewer individuals. You can really reach out to an elected official. And usually if you say, hey, I've got a 12-year-old, I got a 7-year-old, whatever, they'd like to meet you. They're usually amenable to doing that. They can set something up. They're usually in your district and they're around. But there's this other neat pathway, which a lot of cities are starting to adopt, which is having something like a youth council. And usually that just means kids who want to get involved and have something to say maybe about the playgrounds that they have or the green spaces or the quality of food that's in their lunchrooms at school. And that's just a time for an opportunity for kids who care about these things to get together, say stuff, and have someone listen to them in government. Now, sure, they don't have any official power. They're not legislating. They're not passing laws or voting, but they are getting practice in seeing what this looks like. And I think it's important to humanize the people that do government, because oftentimes we have this idea of like this big, bad, amorphous people in DC making decisions that we don't understand or maybe don't agree with. But the people who are doing local politics are essentially volunteers who are trying to make their communities better and think that they have something to offer. We don't need to demonize those people. They're not getting paid a bunch. People are mean to them all the time, and they're really just trying their best. And I think when we let our kids see that it's our neighbors, it's our friends, it's people who look like us or people who don't, who are trying to do that work, they can kind of see a position for themselves maybe in the future. And that's something I care about. When you ask kids now, what do you want to be when you grow up? Being a politician or the president isn't in the top 20 at all. And it used to be that kids would say, I want to be the president. Do you know what number one is?
Social media influencer.
Yep. It's a content creator. Yep. YouTuber. That's number one.
Yeah. I've got the best job ever.
Everyone wants it.
Better than president.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like a great idea. I think, obviously it's very important to have this knowledge out there. I think, democracy is under attack, and it's not more important than ever right now to have people understand the systems of democracy. I mean, speaking from someone who's not a political scientist, and, I went through school, I took the courses on civics, and, I think we had a grade 10 course that we had to take once, and then everything else is your own learning after that. But understanding, the systems of government and what all the words mean, like, is Kamala Harris a Marxist? Is she a communist, really? Like, do her policies reflect the system communism? These are questions that are dominating certain spheres of media right now. And I think if people had a grounding in civics, we'd understand what these words actually meant, rather than just use them as smears for a whole class of people. So I think it's very important. What benefits do you see coming of this educational campaign? What would you like to see, and what do you think is the end result of a benefit for more civics in the classroom and from parents as well?
So my first goal is I want parents to take this on, because oftentimes what I hear when I talk to people is they'll say, oh, I don't know enough. So like, I just don't want to lead them astray, or it's just like not really something I'm into. And the thing is, our kids learn from what we do and what we don't do. And if they never see us caring about this, if they never see us showing them what it is to want to learn a little bit more or grow a little bit in our understanding of government, they're not going to want to do it either. And so it is my sincerest hope that as soon as I plant this little bug in someone's ear, they can say like, oh, you know what, maybe I can learn a little bit more, because you can. We know that adults have to navigate systems that are way complex. Like if you ever have a medical thing, yeah, you're figuring out a bureaucracy. You can figure out a little bit of local government. It's not that hard. And when our kids can see that there's a value in it, my hope is that they'll have more of an ability to look up to these things, that they can see themselves in it, that they can change our politics for the better, because it's not like anyone else is coming to save us or make this better. We're in charge of this system. We're the adults in the room right now. We're the one who gets to steer the ship, but we have to be willing to be the crew instead of some passengers that are just like, oh God, I don't like where this is going. It's like, sorry, y'all, we have to do this. It's up to us. And I think on your point about socialism, that's something else I love about DCInbox. If you type in socialism or Marxist, you can see the history of how long it's been used, and you can see all the different people, all the different ideas. And you can get a sense of like, oh, this is actually characterizing a class of ideas, but not necessarily a governing structure, because that's not usually how it's actually used in U.S. politics today.
How far back does your DCInbox go in terms of
2010?
2010. That's very cool. And after that, you have to go to the paper copies at the library.
Someone else could do that. That is not for me. Yeah.
It's a very good tool. I have to go take a look at that. That might be fun. So what would you say is the most important message in your book for the readers to take away?
The most important thing is that we have to do this. It's not a book that's like scoldy or finger waggy. It's like, okay, I know that we're all feeling like we're suffering a little bit, but guess what? If we can take this on, it can get better. And it is true. Government systems where more people understand and how to keep people accountable, they get policies that reflect what they want. It helps our government if we cannot keep them accountable, because then they can do whatever they want. The more that people understand that they have a role in this, they have levers of power to pull on, the better and more reflective our government will be of what people actually want it to look like.
That's true. Yeah. An informed populace is the key to a working democracy. And I mean, there's so many pillars that go into it. And the media is obviously a very strong pillar as well. And it's being undermined, I think, in a lot of cases. People just don't trust the media. And if you don't trust the information you're getting, how are you going to hold your politicians accountable? It's a vicious circle, I think. And I don't know, how to address that other than they bring back the act that balances news coverage. But you have so many, you have a lot of people taking on fact checking. There's organizations that will now do fact checking, but then they'll be accused of bias. Who watches the watchers? Is there a solution that for the media to become more balanced or to be trusted more by the people?
There's not one that I necessarily see. I think, because it is so bifurcated and cut up in every which way, it's really hard to put that all back together again and say, here's like 3 sources that we're going to trust. So that's not really where I hold out hope. I do know that, our media environment is going to be ever changing, but for the most part, our politics are pretty stable. Like we haven't had like a big revolution in how we do these things. So these systems have lasted a lot longer. They're probably going to be here for a while. And so in order to protect against getting information that feels wrong or maybe just trying to rile you up, if you understand the systems, you're a little bit more immune to that. And so we just don't let media prey on sort of those like gaps in our knowledge as much if we make sure that we get the system that we're in.
Okay, so I have a question for you as a political scientist and an expert on the U.S. system. I've heard there's a lot of back and forth about how the U.S. in some system and some analyses has been ranked as a flawed democracy because of some of the issues that have been going on. And in the social media discussions about this, people have said, well, the U.S. isn't a democracy. We're a republic, so it doesn't matter. So can you judge on that for us? Tell us, is the U.S. a republic and not a democracy?
I love this question. I actually have a part of the book. I have a whole little subject on this where I'm like, if someone tries to bait you into an argument on if it's a democracy or a republic, there's nothing to do there because that's wordplay. We are both a republic and a democracy. We are a Republican form of government in the sense that we elect other people to represent our positions. That's what a republic is. We are a democratic government in the sense that we say every person who's eligible, 18, not incarcerated, not incapacitated, is able to make that decision. Those are democratic choices. And so we are both a democratic republic and a Republican form of democracy. They're both true. And I do think that argument that I see so much online is essentially Republicans or conservatives wanting to hold on to the idea that it is a republic to justify some anti-democratic things like perhaps the Electoral College or the Senate. And Democrats try to hold on to democracy to say like, well, but it should be the case that everyone gets to influence the outcome. But I really don't see this as more than wordplay. And when I talk to most of my political science friends, they come down in a really similar way where it's like, yeah, it's both. And there's not really an argument to be had here, despite the fact that a lot of people online really think so.
In your opinion, I'm going to ask you your opinion, is the Electoral College archaic?
Well, I mean, it's archaic in the sense that it's old. Is it problematic is maybe a different way that I'd think about it. I'm maybe in the minority in this. I kind of understand and appreciate what the Electoral College does for our politics. I think it allows state parties to have more of an influence than they would otherwise. And I think something that we kind of lose sight of is the glue between the federal government and the states is just people. And the people who are like doing state party work are usually looking to eventually do federal party work. And if we were to say the Electoral College doesn't matter and instead we're going after individual voters, then you kind of lose that sort of like stepping stone. You sort of lose that connection. And so state parties would lose a lot of power. And I don't actually know that that's good for the United States. I don't know that that's good for individual states. I understand the quibble with it. It does feel bad when more people vote for one candidate and a different candidate wins because the aggregation system is skewed in that way. But I do think there are benefits that we don't appreciate. And I also don't lose any sleep about changing it because it's incredibly hard to do so. And people who are like, we need a constitutional amendment or we need a national popular vote pact. That never plays on my head because I don't think either of those things are happening.
One thing I was very surprised to find, and I had gone through my civics and I, learned about gerrymandering. This is obviously an anti-democratic process where you stack the districts to deliver more seats to people with less votes. And it's legal in the U.S. Apparently, like they do that. Struck me as crazy. Is that something that you guys are getting rid of, or are you going to keep that?
Well, again, that's like, that's a political decision. It happens state by state. That's not like a It's a really hard thing to deal with, because when you redistrict after the census, when people move and you say, we have to allocate this many House seats to this state because they got more of a population and take one away from another state, you do have to redraw lines. It is tricky no matter how you do it. But I do think there are people who will make good arguments about, like, maybe if we just had a computer system that could say, we're trying to optimize for the compactness of a district, the contiguity of the borders of this district, instead of when we have humans do it, oftentimes we'll say, like, well, it looks like in the last election, a lot of people right along this highway voted for Democrats, or maybe over in this pocket voted for Republicans. Let's try to like carve them up or cut them out.
Yeah.
It's hard, but it's not clear to me that there's an optimal way around this. And states try different things, right? Like some states have independent, bipartisan redistricting commissions, and some states say, we're going to have 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, and then it ends up in the Supreme Court anyhow because they can't agree. And so it is an intractable problem in some ways. It is a hard problem, but it's a political problem. You have to figure it out some way, and that's just people making decisions in a collective style.
And maybe some more civics knowledge will help you guys get through that. I really hope this catches on and makes a big difference. Proud of you for doing that. That's really great to see that sort of push to have rational, knowledge-based decision making in U.S. I think that's great. So thank you for coming on my show, Lindsey. I really appreciate it, and good luck with your book.
Thank you so much. It was really fun to talk with you about all this.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.